He was just a delivery boy, quiet, different, invisible. But when he saw what no one else could, everything changed. In 15 minutes, he solved a problem worth millions and exposed the dark side of power. One moment of courage, one act of genius, a story of justice, revenge, and redemption. Don't miss The Cleaning Lady's Genius Son, a story that will change how you see the world. Subscribe now and share the story that everyone will be talking about. Ethan Cole had always found comfort in patterns. Patterns meant predictability, and predictability meant safety. Every morning followed the same rhythm. He left the small apartment on Folsom Street at precisely 6:45, adjusted the strap of his faded gray backpack, and walked the 9 blocks to the cafe where he worked part-time delivering sandwiches and coffee. The city was already awake by then, humming with electric scooters, barking dogs, and the faint metallic clang of streetcars. To most people, it was noise. To Ethan, it was data movements, signals, repetitions that made the chaos of San Francisco feel almost logical. He didn't like talking much at the cafe. The other delivery guys teased him for always staring at the ticket monitor as if it were a sacred text. But Ethan wasn't being antisocial. He simply didn't know how to fill silence with words the way others did. Conversations were unpredictable, but systems never were. When he wasn't making deliveries, he sat in the corner during breaks, tracing invisible code on the countertop with his finger. His mother, Linda, worked nights cleaning offices in one of the city's tallest glass towers, Quantum Dynamics. For 15 years, she had scrubbed marble floors, polished chrome, emptied trash cans filled with confidential printouts and half-eaten lunches, always finishing before dawn. Ethan sometimes went with her when he was younger, sitting in the empty lobbies, reading any manuals or papers left behind on desks. That was how he learned to code. Not from teachers, but from the forgotten fragments of other people's work. They didn't have much, but Linda had made their home a fortress of quiet resilience. The apartment walls were lined with her handwritten reminders: rent due Friday, call doctor, don't forget insulin. His younger brother Noah was fragile and often sick, and the medication bills stacked higher every month. Linda worked double shifts, and Ethan delivered orders to keep up with costs. He'd been offered a scholarship to Stanford at 16, but he turned it down when his mother was diagnosed with chronic hypertension. You can always go later, she told him, but deep down he knew later was a word their life rarely allowed. The morning the story began was ordinary in every visible sense. Ethan's delivery app blinked with a large order for the 20th floor of Quantum Dynamics: 15 lattes, 8 wraps, and 4 muffins. He adjusted his uniform cap and balanced the cardboard trays with his usual precision. It was an unremarkable task, but his heart sped up slightly as he stepped through the building's revolving doors. He hadn't been inside Quantum Dynamics in years, not since he was a teenager waiting for his mother to finish her shift. The marble floors gleamed exactly the way he remembered. Upstairs, the tension was almost tangible. Engineers were clustered around an enormous digital wall, its surface filled with streams of code and red error messages. The air vibrated with frustration. Ethan could hear fragments of conversation. Query overload, runtime bottleneck, costing us millions. He lingered near the reception desk, setting down the trays. His eyes flicked to the projected code, scanning it the way other people scan a photograph. Within seconds, he saw the problem: a flawed data pipeline. Too many nested calls. They were running a linear search where a hash index should have been. It was as obvious to him as a misplaced comma. He whispered without thinking, "They're using the wrong structure." The receptionist, a woman with glossy hair and a voice sharp as glass, rolled her eyes. "Yeah, sure. The delivery guy knows better than 30 engineers." She snickered, tapping her manicured nails on the counter. Ethan didn't respond. He wasn't offended, just confused. He hadn't meant to speak aloud. His brain had simply done what it always did: fix things. A group of executives entered the lobby, mid-discussion. Among them was Gregory Dalton, the CEO, a man whose presence seemed to silence every room. Dalton was in his 50s, athletic, precise, with a reputation for brilliance and arrogance in equal measure. He caught Ethan staring at the screen and frowned. "Can I help you?" Ethan hesitated, the words sticking in his throat. "That code," he managed. You're losing processing time because you're using a linear search on distributed input. It can't scale past 200,000 requests. The silence that followed was almost physical. The executives froze. A few engineers exchanged startled looks. Dalton raised an eyebrow, amusement curling in his voice. And how would you know that, son? You a software architect under that apron? No, Ethan said simply. I just noticed. Dalton chuckled, the kind of laugh meant to invite others to join. You noticed? Do you have any idea how many PhDs have been on this for 6 months? You think you can fix what my entire R&D division can't? Ethan lowered his gaze. You're not using distributed caching. It's looping through redundant calls. You're choking the pipeline. One of the engineers, curious despite himself, leaned toward the screen. He's not wrong, he whispered, but Dalton didn't like interruptions. Tell you what, he said, turning to the small crowd that had begun to form. Let's have a show. Kid, if you think you're so smart, you've got 15 minutes to improve performance by 10%. Do that, and maybe I'll let you finish your coffee before security walks you out. Ethan's throat tightened. He could leave. He should leave. But the challenge stirred something inside him, a quiet certainty. Patterns wanted to be completed. Systems wanted to work. Okay, he said softly. Dalton gestured toward the nearest terminal, a smirk tugging at his mouth. Employees whispered, filming discreetly with their phones. Ethan set down the trays, pulled his old cracked smartphone from his pocket, and began typing. His fingers moved fast but precise, his mind entering the familiar tunnel where the world disappeared and only logic existed. He reorganized the code like rearranging a messy drawer grouping, pruning, optimizing. Every line had to justify its existence. Every process had to earn its place. Time melted. His breathing steadied. When he finished, he stepped back. You can test it now. The engineer nearest to him hesitated, then hit run. The simulation began. Numbers scrolled down, faster, smoother. The red error bars vanished. The system completed 200,000 simultaneous queries in just over 3 seconds. Silence fell. That's impossible, someone whispered. Dalton's jaw tightened. Coincidence? He muttered. Probably a cached result. Do it again. They did. The result was identical. Ethan didn't gloat. He just looked at Dalton and said, You can restructure your servers now. The cost per query will drop by half. Dalton's voice hardened. You think you can waltz in here, embarrass my team, and play hero? You're a delivery boy, not an engineer. He turned toward security. Get him out of here, and tell housekeeping they can consider tonight their last shift. Ethan froze. Housekeeping. He meant his mother. Dalton knew exactly who she was. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Then quietly, he gathered his things. He didn't argue or beg. He simply looked at the screen one last time, the neat lines of his code glowing in perfect balance, and walked out. By evening, the video of the confrontation was everywhere. Twitter, Reddit, YouTube. Millions watched the young delivery worker calmly fix what a multi-million-dollar company had failed to solve. The clip ended with Dalton's furious face, ordering security to remove him. The internet did what the internet always did. It chose sides. Ethan sat in their small kitchen that night, the blue light from his phone reflecting on his face. Linda came home exhausted, the scent of disinfectant clinging to her clothes. She saw the look in his eyes and knew something had happened. He told her everything, each detail spilling out like a confession. When he reached the part about Dalton threatening her job, her expression changed, pride mixed with fear. You shouldn't have said anything, she whispered, though her voice trembled. These people, they don't forgive being shown up. I didn't mean to embarrass him, Ethan said. It was just wrong. The system. I know, baby, she interrupted softly. You always fix things when they're broken, but some people don't want fixing. They sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the city lights shimmered through the window, blurring into a pattern Ethan couldn't quite decode. He didn't realize that somewhere across town, Quantum Dynamics' boardroom was already in chaos. Dalton had called an emergency meeting. The video had reached 500,000 views in 12 hours, investors were demanding explanations, and his PR team was panicking. Dalton's pride, his empire, his image, it was all cracking. And the boy he'd tried to humiliate had become the spark that lit the fire. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He kept replaying the code in his mind, each function running flawlessly in the silence of his thoughts. It wasn't the algorithm that haunted him. It was Dalton's voice full of contempt, and the moment he'd said his mother's name like a weapon. For the first time, Ethan felt something beyond logic stirring in his chest. Not anger exactly, but a need for justice, slow, deliberate, and precise. The next morning, while Linda slept after her shift, Ethan received a message request from an unknown number. It was short and direct. "My name is Michael Torres, investigative journalist, TechWatch News. I've been following quantum dynamics for months. I think we should talk." He stared at the screen, uncertain. The world had noticed him, and that was dangerous. But maybe for once, being noticed was exactly what was needed. He closed his eyes, inhaled, and thought of his mother scrubbing office floors while people like Dalton treated her as invisible. Then he opened the message. The pattern had changed, and for the first time in his life, Ethan Cole was ready to follow where it led. The message from Michael Torres sat on Ethan's phone for hours before he found the courage to answer it. He read it again and again, analyzing every word as though it were a line of code that might hide a trap. Investigative journalist, TechWatch News. "We should talk." The phrase was both invitation and risk, like a door he wasn't sure he wanted to open. He typed a reply twice, deleted it both times, and finally wrote a simple, "Okay, when and where?" The response came instantly, as if the man had been waiting. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Cafe Finch on Howard Street. I'll buy the coffee." That night, he told his mother about it while she prepared her uniform. Linda didn't approve, but didn't forbid it either. She had spent too many years cleaning up the messes of powerful men to believe that any journalist could fix the damage they did. Still, she saw the quiet determination in her son's face and knew she wouldn't be able to stop him. "Be careful," she said softly. "People like that. They always have an angle." He promised he would be careful, but what he really felt was a strange pull toward the truth, as if all the scattered lines of his life were converging into one equation. Cafe Finch was small, crowded, and loud in the way downtown cafes always were. Ethan hated loud spaces, but he endured it by focusing on the details, the hum of the espresso machine, the rhythmic clinking of cups, the hiss of steam. Michael Torres was easy to spot. Middle-aged, silver hair pulled back, laptop open, a press badge hanging from his jacket pocket. He smiled when Ethan approached, a smile that was too sharp to be entirely reassuring. "Mr. Cole," he said, standing to shake his hand. "Or do you prefer Ethan?" Ethan hesitated before shaking his hand. "Ethan is fine." They sat. Michael didn't waste time. The video of what happened at Quantum Dynamics has over 3 million views. Everyone's talking about it. Some people think you're a genius. Others think it was a setup. "I think it's something else, an opening." Ethan frowned slightly. "An opening for what?" Michael leaned closer. "For justice. For exposure. I've been investigating Dalton for nearly 2 years. Illegal layoffs, fake invoices, backdoor deals with overseas firms. But I can't prove it yet. What you did embarrassed him publicly, which means he's going to make mistakes. And when he does, we'll be ready." Ethan listened silently, his eyes fixed on a point beyond Michael's shoulder. The journalist's voice was fast, full of practiced intensity, the voice of a man who lived on deadlines and caffeine. "Why me?" Ethan finally asked. "Because you're inside the narrative now," Michael said. "You're the face of it. He'll try to discredit you, maybe even hurt your mother's career. But if we work together, we can turn the tables before he has the chance." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed documents, employee terminations, contracts signed by shell companies, redacted emails. "These are pieces," Michael said, "but I need someone who can find the missing ones. Someone who knows how to look beneath the surface." Ethan studied the papers. The patterns jumped out immediately: repeated invoice codes, overlapping timestamps, inconsistencies in expense sheets. They didn't form a full picture yet, but he could see where they were leading. "You want me to hack him?" Ethan said flatly. Michael shook his head. "No, not hacking. Observing. Connecting the dots. Everything you find must be done legally. I don't want to put you in danger." Ethan wasn't convinced. And if he finds out? Then we make sure what we find is too big for him to bury, Michael replied. When Ethan returned home, Linda was sitting at the kitchen table sorting receipts. He called you, didn't he? She asked. He nodded. She sighed. I knew it. Journalists are like moths. They fly toward the fire and drag others with them. She reached into a drawer and took out an envelope, yellowed at the edges. If you're going to do this, she said, you should see what I've kept. Inside were old papers, copies of cleaning schedules, discarded memos she'd found during her shifts, even a few photographs. Your mother's souvenirs, she said bitterly. 15 years of invisible work. People forget that cleaners see everything. They talk like we're not there. Ethan leafed through them, his analytical mind automatically cataloging names, dates, patterns. He realized these weren't souvenirs. They were evidence. The next few days blurred together. He continued delivering orders during the day, keeping his routine unchanged so no one would suspect anything. At night, he worked quietly on his computer, building small programs to cross-reference data from Michael's documents with the information his mother had saved. The results were astonishing. Quantum Dynamics had been channeling funds into consulting firms that existed only on paper, redirecting millions of dollars into offshore accounts. The timestamps on the invoices aligned perfectly with the dates of project failures the company had reported to investors. Michael visited him twice a week, bringing new files and updates from his sources. Each time, Ethan provided structured summaries and graphs, stripping the chaos into elegant logic. You process faster than anyone I've worked with, Michael said once. Ethan shrugged. I see patterns. It wasn't arrogance. It was simply the truth of how his mind worked. He didn't think in words or emotions, but in systems. And Dalton's corruption was a system intricate, predictable, and therefore solvable. Meanwhile, at Quantum Dynamics, Gregory Dalton was unraveling. The viral video had damaged the company's image, and investors were demanding explanations. He blamed his PR department, his engineers, even his assistant. But deep down, he blamed the boy who had humiliated him. He ordered internal audits, convinced there was sabotage. He hired a private investigator, a former federal agent named Rice, to follow Ethan and his mother. Rice was thorough. Within days, he knew where Ethan lived, where he worked, and what routes he took. He sent Dalton photos. Ethan meeting Michael in cafes, Linda leaving the building with folders in her hands. They're planning something, Rice reported. Dalton smiled thinly. Then let's give them something to plan for. The tension grew thicker each day. Ethan noticed he was being watched, cars idling too long on his street, faces that lingered in reflections. He told Michael, who cursed under his breath. We have to move faster, the journalist said. If he's getting paranoid, he'll make mistakes. That's when we strike. They decided to document everything meticulously, names, accounts, digital trails, phone logs. Michael used his connections to verify each piece through legal channels, ensuring the evidence would hold in court. Ethan refined his algorithms to detect hidden links in Dalton's financial web, the kind that human auditors would miss. Linda grew quieter as the nights stretched longer. She saw the exhaustion in her son's eyes, the way he flinched at sudden noises, the way his hands trembled slightly when he typed for hours. This isn't your fight, she told him one evening. You fixed what they broke. Let that be enough. But Ethan shook his head. It's not enough if they can still hurt people. There was no changing his mind after that. One night near midnight, as he combed through another data set, he found a pattern that made his heart race. An unregistered transaction, $12 million, transferred from Quantum Dynamics R&D budget to a private account under the name V. Petrov. He remembered seeing that name once before in an industry article. Petrov was a representative for Tech Corp, Quantum's biggest competitor overseas. Ethan stared at the screen, his mind piecing together the sequence. Dalton wasn't just corrupt. He was selling proprietary technology to competitors. He called Michael immediately. I found something, he said. Within hours, they were sitting in Michael's cluttered office surrounded by piles of notes. Ethan explained the structure, how Dalton used fake software firms to launder money and disguise the sale of internal algorithms. Michael listened, occasionally jotting notes, his eyes wide. This is it, he said. This is the kind of evidence that ends careers. But Ethan's expression was grave. If we release it now, he'll destroy the company. Hundreds of people could lose their jobs. Michael frowned. That's the price of justice. Ethan shook his head. Justice isn't destruction. It's balance. They decided to aim for something surgical, a plan to expose Dalton while preserving the company. Ethan proposed using the data itself, turning Dalton's paranoia into a trap. They would let him believe he was winning, let him stage a public confrontation where he thought he could crush them. And then, when the cameras were rolling, they'd reveal everything. Michael was skeptical at first, but the more he listened to Ethan's quiet, methodical reasoning, the more he realized the boy wasn't guessing. He was designing. You think like an engineer, Michael said finally, even with people. Ethan didn't deny it. Systems are systems. You just need to find the weakest node. Over the next week, they refined the plan. Michael coordinated with an insider at Quantum Dynamics, a senior engineer, who had grown disillusioned with Dalton's leadership. The man agreed to help, secretly recording board meetings and providing internal memos. Linda continued to work nights, pretending not to know anything, though she had begun keeping her own small journal of details she overheard. Between them, they were building something powerful, a quiet alliance between the invisible and the underestimated. But danger was closing in. Rice, the investigator, reported to Dalton that Ethan had been in contact with a journalist and was collecting files. Dalton's patience snapped. If he wants to play hero, let's make him a villain, he said. He ordered forged documents to be planted photographs of Linda in restricted areas, fake timestamps implying she had stolen confidential information. His PR team began drafting statements about internal leaks and external manipulation. Dalton's plan was simple: destroy their credibility before they could act. Ethan sensed the storm coming before it hit. The tone of emails from the company changed. Guards at the lobby gave his mother strange looks. Michael urged him to stay calm, to trust the timing. He's overplaying his hand, the journalist said. The more desperate he gets, the more careless he'll become. But Ethan couldn't shake the dread that something irreversible was about to happen. One evening, Linda came home early, her face pale. They suspended me, she whispered. Said there's an investigation. They think I leaked documents. Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. He took her trembling hands in his. It's a lie, he said. I'll prove it. She tried to smile, but her eyes glistened with tears. You don't have to fix this, Ethan. You've done enough. But he knew that wasn't true. The system wasn't fixed yet. That night, he sat in front of his computer, every piece of data he'd collected flashing before him. Dalton thought he could erase the truth by twisting it. But what he didn't understand was that Ethan's mind didn't lose track of anything. Every file, every timestamp, every anomaly lived in perfect recall. The patterns were clearer than ever now: cause, effect, deception, exposure. He worked until dawn, weaving them into something undeniable. By morning, Michael arrived with grim news. They've announced a company-wide meeting. Tomorrow. Dalton's calling it a demonstration of transparency. It's a setup. He's going to use it to accuse you and your mother publicly. Ethan nodded slowly. Good, he said. Michael blinked. Good? That's where it happens, Ethan replied. That's where everything ends. Outside, the sun rose over the city, painting the glass towers in gold. Linda was asleep on the couch, exhaustion finally winning over worry. Ethan looked at her and felt a calm resolve settle inside him. He had spent his life avoiding conflict, speaking through numbers and code because people were too unpredictable. But now the system itself, the human system, needed debugging. And he was the only one who saw all its broken lines. As he turned back to his computer, preparing for the day that would decide everything, a single thought pulsed through his mind with algorithmic precision. This wasn't about revenge. It was about equilibrium. It was about making the world for once run the way it should. The morning of the meeting dawned gray and heavy with fog, as if the entire city were holding its breath. Ethan hadn't slept. He sat by the window of their small apartment, watching the mist curl between the buildings, his computer open on the table. Lines of code glowed faintly on the screen, reflecting in his eyes like shifting constellations. Every piece of evidence they had gathered, transactions, voice recordings, internal memos, was sorted, encrypted, and stored in multiple locations. He had built the system himself, automatic redundancies, cloud triggers, and remote backups that would activate if anything happened to him or his mother. It wasn't paranoia, it was logic. Dalton was a man who used control as a weapon. Ethan had simply taken that weapon away from him. Linda moved quietly behind him, preparing coffee. She looked exhausted, her uniform still hanging by the door, though she hadn't worn it since the suspension. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Once you do this, there's no going back." Ethan didn't look up. "There was no going back the moment he used your name to threaten me." She placed a hand on his shoulder, the same gesture she used when he was a child overwhelmed by noise or light. "Then promise me one thing," she said. "Whatever happens, you stay calm. People like Dalton feed on chaos. Don't give him that satisfaction." Ethan nodded. Calm was something he understood better than most. Later that morning, Michael arrived with a thick folder and dark circles under his eyes. "It's all ready," he said, dropping the folder onto the table. "We have the federal contacts briefed, the story embargoed with 3 outlets, and the data mirrored across secure servers. Once you trigger the presentation, it'll go live." Ethan's fingers traced the folder absently, his mind already running simulations. "He's going to accuse us," he said. "He'll have forged evidence. He'll try to make it emotional." Michael smirked tiredly. "And you'll counter with facts. That's what scares him." They spent the rest of the day reviewing the sequence. The plan had to be precise, every step coordinated down to the second. Dalton would call the meeting under the guise of corporate transparency, presenting his version of events. He would claim that Linda and Ethan had stolen proprietary data. Then when the screens were on and the cameras rolling, Ethan would present the truth, a full display of Dalton's corruption, his offshore accounts, his voice on the recordings. It would all unfold live, impossible to contain or spin. By evening, Ethan was back at his computer, refining his algorithms one last time. He adjusted the sequence triggers, making sure each slide of evidence would appear automatically. It was the same calm precision he applied to debugging code. No emotion, no hesitation. His autistic mind, often misunderstood as detached, was his greatest strength now. He could focus without distraction, analyze without panic. When everything else was noise, logic became his refuge. Meanwhile, at Quantum Dynamics, Dalton was a storm in a tailored suit. He paced the length of the boardroom, barking orders at his assistants. "I want every department head there tomorrow. Board members, investors, press, everyone. We'll show them what kind of criminals we're dealing with." He glanced at Rice, the private investigator, who stood near the window. "You're sure the documents look authentic?" Rice nodded. "Completely. Photos of the mother in restricted zones, time-stamped emails from an anonymous account, payment trails linking her to that journalist. It's airtight." Dalton smiled, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Once I expose them, I'll have grounds for prosecution. The board will have no choice but to side with me." But beneath the bluster, Dalton was unraveling. He hadn't slept in days. The investors were furious. The company's stock had dipped again, and the whispers in the industry were growing louder. His empire was starting to crack, and he could feel it slipping away. Still, he convinced himself he could control the narrative. He always had. Power, he believed, was about who told the story first. The next morning, the Quantum Dynamics lobby buzzed with activity. Reporters lined up with cameras, employees whispered in clusters, and security guards scanned every badge twice. Linda arrived with Ethan and Michael, her hands trembling as they passed through the metal detectors. Ethan noticed everything, the flicker of the lights, the rhythm of footsteps, the faint hum of the air vents. His mind recorded it all automatically, grounding him in the sensory structure of the moment. Inside the boardroom, Dalton greeted the crowd with theatrical confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, adjusting his tie, "thank you for joining us on such short notice. Transparency and integrity are the foundations of quantum dynamics, and today we address a serious breach of those values." He gestured toward the large screen behind him, where photographs of Linda and Ethan appeared, grainy, time-stamped, fabricated. Murmurs rippled through the audience. These individuals, Dalton continued, collaborated with external agents to steal confidential material and compromise our systems. Their actions cost us millions and threaten the livelihoods of every person in this company." Linda gasped softly. Michael squeezed her hand under the table, his face tight with fury. Ethan remained still, his gaze fixed on the screen. His expression didn't change, but his fingers moved slightly, tapping the rhythm he used to regulate focus. Dalton mistook his calm for fear. "You have something to say, Mr. Cole?" the CEO taunted. "Because if you do, this is your chance." Ethan stood. The room quieted instantly. He walked to the terminal at the center of the table, his steps measured, his voice low but steady. "Yes," he said. "I'd like to show my version." Dalton smirked. "By all means." Ethan inserted a small drive into the port. The screens flickered, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the first image appeared, not of Linda or himself, but of Dalton sitting in a restaurant across from a man in a dark suit. The date and location were clear, 3 weeks earlier. "This is Vladimir Petrov," Ethan said, "representative of Tech Corp, your direct competitor. Here you're discussing the sale of Quantum's proprietary algorithms for $12 million. Gasps filled the room. Dalton's smile faltered. "That's absurd," he snapped. "Fabricated." Ethan's voice didn't rise. "Then explain this." The next slide displayed an audio waveform, and Dalton's voice filled the room. "The algorithm is worth at least $20 million. I can deliver the full source code by the end of the month." The silence was absolute. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. Dalton's face drained of color. "Taken out of context," he muttered. But Ethan wasn't done. "Here's more context." He advanced the sequence. Screens filled with contracts, emails, financial transfers, each tied directly to Dalton. Then came internal memos detailing discriminatory practices, fake terminations, and manipulated reports. Each revelation landed like a blow, the murmurs of the crowd growing louder, angrier. Finally, Ethan displayed the last slide, a report showing the company's performance after his algorithm had been implemented. "In 2 weeks," he said quietly, "my fix saved Quantum Dynamics $143 million in operating costs and increased system efficiency by 120%. That's the result of the same code you tried to erase." Dalton's composure shattered. "You think you can walk in here and destroy me?" he shouted. "You're a nobody. A delivery boy with a disorder who doesn't even understand the real world." His words hung in the air, venomous and irreversible. Every camera in the room was recording. Ethan turned to him, his face unreadable. "You built a system on lies," he said softly. "I just debugged it." At that moment, 2 figures entered the room, federal agents, flanked by Michael. One of them stepped forward, flashing a badge. "Gregory Dalton, you are under arrest for industrial espionage, fraud, and discrimination." The CEO stumbled back, protesting, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos erupting around him. Reporters shouted questions, employees recorded with their phones, and the board members exchanged shocked glances. As the agents handcuffed Dalton and let him out, Ethan stood perfectly still. He felt no triumph, only a quiet exhaustion. The system was corrected, but correction didn't erase the damage it had caused. Linda reached for his hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "It's over," she whispered. He nodded, though part of him knew that for people like them, nothing was ever truly over. Hours later, the board held an emergency session. The company was in turmoil, but amid the wreckage, a strange respect had begun to form around Ethan. The man who had been dismissed as an oddity had become their savior. By evening, news outlets across the country were running the story. "Whistleblower genius exposes corporate corruption." Michael's article led the wave, careful to protect Linda's privacy while highlighting the broader implications of what they had uncovered. When Ethan returned home, the city felt different. The fog had lifted, revealing a crisp night sky dotted with stars. He sat on the fire escape, listening to the distant sounds of traffic, feeling the cool metal beneath his hands. For the first time in years, the noise of the world didn't overwhelm him. It felt balanced, almost musical. Michael joined him a little later, leaning against the railing. "You know," he said, "you just changed everything. Dalton's arrest will ripple through the industry for years. Ethan didn't answer right away. We didn't destroy the company, he said finally. That was important. Michael smiled faintly. You're thinking like a leader. Ethan shook his head. I'm thinking like an engineer. Fixing what's broken doesn't make me a leader. He paused, looking out at the glowing skyline. But maybe it's a start. Inside, Linda was asleep, her breathing slow and steady for the first time in days. The folder of old papers lay closed on the table, its purpose fulfilled. Ethan glanced back at it, then at the stars. The pattern had completed itself, but patterns, he knew, always evolved. There would be new ones to solve, new systems to balance. For now, though, he allowed himself a rare moment of stillness. Tomorrow, quantum dynamics would begin rebuilding. And whether he wanted it or not, Ethan Cole would be at the center of that reconstruction, not as the delivery boy who had fixed a broken algorithm, but as the quiet mind who had rewritten the code of an entire company's conscience. The air inside Quantum Dynamics felt different after the arrest. What had once been a palace of confidence and control now carried the faint echo of uncertainty. For years, the employees had walked those glass corridors with measured obedience, speaking in cautious tones whenever Dalton's name surfaced. Now his absence was a presence of its own, an unspoken question lingering in every office and hallway. No one knew what would happen next. Would the company collapse under scandal, or would it survive, reborn under new leadership? For most, it was too soon to tell. For Ethan, it was too late to turn back. In the days following the confrontation, Quantum Dynamics became a spectacle. Journalists camped outside the building, their cameras pointed at the revolving doors as though they might catch another headline in motion. Employees moved quietly, trying to avoid being photographed. Ethan avoided the attention entirely. After the arrest, he had refused all interviews, instructing Michael to handle the press. The media painted him as the mysterious prodigy, the silent genius who had dismantled a corporate empire with nothing but logic and integrity. He didn't read the articles. Words never interested him as much as actions did. He spent his days in front of his computer, analyzing the remnants of Dalton's digital empire, sorting through corrupted files, deleting malware that had been intentionally planted to sabotage evidence. The work grounded him. It was his language, his calm after the storm. Michael became the public face of the operation, coordinating with federal investigators and preparing the formal reports. His voice filled talk shows and podcasts across the country, explaining the broader implications of the case. This isn't just one company's scandal, he said during one interview. It's a reflection of how easily greed hides behind innovation, but it also shows something else, that brilliance can come from anywhere, that systems thrive when diversity of thought is allowed to flourish. Ethan watched that clip once and turned it off midway. Compliments made him uncomfortable. He wasn't trying to be a symbol. He had simply followed logic where it led. Quantum's board of directors, shaken but pragmatic, convened a series of emergency meetings. The company's shares had fallen but hadn't collapsed completely. Investors still saw potential. They just needed new leadership to believe in. In a quiet meeting that lasted 3 hours, the board voted to remove Dalton permanently and to form a transitional committee to oversee reconstruction. Among the names mentioned for advisory roles was Dr. Alan Rutherford, one of the senior engineers who had witnessed the confrontation in the boardroom. Rutherford had been among the first to publicly commend Ethan's work. When he called to thank Ethan for saving the company from itself, the young man responded only, "The system saved itself. It just needed someone to clear the errors." But while Quantum Dynamics was trying to stabilize, the world outside was restless. The internet didn't forgive or forget easily. Clips of Dalton's outbursts circulated endlessly, memes were born overnight, and opinion pieces flooded every tech journal. Some celebrated Ethan as a hero. Others questioned whether a boy with no formal degree should have been able to wield such influence. Conspiracy theorists even claimed that the entire event had been orchestrated by rival corporations. Ethan ignored it all. The noise of public discourse didn't interest him. He had spent his life filtering out irrelevant input, and now was no different. Linda, however, was not immune to the attention. Reporters had found their apartment twice, leaving letters and cameras at the door. She began sleeping less, afraid someone might knock in the middle of the night. One evening, Ethan came home to find her sitting by the window, the curtains drawn. They want a picture of you, she said quietly. They say it's for a magazine. I told them no. He nodded. You did right. She sighed, rubbing her eyes. I just want it all to stop. He looked at her and said, It will, but not yet. There's still more to fix. A week later, Michael arrived with news. The board wants to meet you, he said. They're forming an advisory council for restructuring. They want you to be part of it. Ethan frowned. I'm not a manager. You don't have to be, Michael replied. They need direction. They need someone who understands efficiency, real efficiency, not the kind Dalton preached. They're scared, Ethan. You're the one person they can't manipulate. Ethan stared at the papers Michael handed him. Formal invitations, proposals, offers of consultancy. None of it made sense. He had never wanted authority, only order. But then he thought of his mother, of the other workers like her who had been invisible all those years. Maybe this was a way to make them seen. When Ethan entered the Quantum building again, security didn't stop him. They greeted him respectfully, even nervously. The same lobby that had once been a stage for his humiliation now carried a different energy. People recognized him, whispered his name, but no one mocked. He took the elevator to the top floor, where the board awaited. The meeting was formal, but the tone was not one of interrogation. It was one of gratitude and desperation. Mr. Cole, said the chairman, a gray-haired man with a weary expression, we owe you an apology and frankly a debt. Without your intervention, this company would have collapsed under Dalton's leadership. We'd like to discuss how you can help us rebuild. Ethan listened as they explained their plans. New transparency policies, ethical oversight, and operational audits. They wanted him to review their systems and suggest improvements. He accepted, but with conditions. If I do this, he said quietly, you'll reinstate the cleaning staff you dismissed. You'll give them benefits, healthcare, retirement plans, paid leave. You'll treat them like employees, not background noise. The room went silent. The chairman exchanged glances with his colleagues. That's unusual, he admitted, but not unreasonable. He extended a hand. You have our word. Ethan shook it once. Good, he said. Then let's begin. The following weeks were a whirlwind of transformation. Ethan worked closely with the engineering teams, rewriting systems, training employees to think differently about optimization. He didn't lead with authority, he led with clarity. Meetings that once dragged for hours became streamlined, efficient. His quiet focus was contagious. Slowly, the culture of Quantum began to change. Employees who had been afraid to speak up started contributing ideas. The word inclusive became more than a slogan. It became a framework for innovation. Michael, meanwhile, continued documenting everything. His expose on Dalton turned into a book deal, but he remained close to Ethan, not as a journalist, but as a friend. They met often in the evenings, usually in silence, sipping coffee and watching the city below. Michael was fascinated by how unbothered Ethan seemed by fame. You could be on every magazine cover in the country, he said once. You're the youngest systems architect anyone's ever heard of? Ethan only shrugged. Cameras don't fix code. But beneath the calm surface, Ethan felt the weight of what he'd done. He had exposed a corrupt man, yes, but he had also altered countless lives. People had lost their jobs, their reputations, their stability. Even Dalton, sitting in a federal holding cell, haunted his thoughts. Justice had been served, but the taste of victory was bitter. Late at night, when the city was quiet, he would open old code files and stare at them for hours, searching for mistakes. He couldn't afford to miss anything. Precision was his armor against chaos. Then one evening, Dr. Rutherford approached him with a proposition. The board is voting on permanent leadership, he said. They're impressed with your reforms. Some of us think you should lead the company yourself. Ethan blinked. As CEO? The doctor nodded. Yes. You've already done more for Quantum in a month than Dalton did in years. You see things differently. That's what we need. Ethan's first instinct was to refuse. Leadership meant exposure, meetings, people, noise. All the things he'd avoided his whole life. But he thought of the systems he'd built, of how fragile they were without proper oversight. I'll consider it, he said. When the day of the vote arrived, Ethan sat at the far end of the long conference table, hands folded, eyes lowered. The board members discussed, debated, and finally cast their votes. When the chairman read the result, unanimous approval, the room erupted in polite applause. Ethan didn't smile. He simply nodded, processing the change as if it were another algorithmic event. Input, result, output. But when he walked through the building later, employees stopped to shake his hand, some even thanking him. Their sincerity disarmed him. For the first time, he realized leadership didn't have to mean ego. It could mean responsibility. In his first address as CEO, Ethan stood before the company's assembled staff. He didn't give a grand speech or make promises. He simply said, "From now on, efficiency will mean empathy, because systems only work when people do." The applause that followed was genuine, not orchestrated. Linda watched from the front row, tears shining in her eyes. Her son, who once avoided eye contact and feared loud rooms, was now standing before hundreds with quiet confidence. As quantum dynamics rebuilt itself, its reputation slowly shifted. The public began to see it as a model of reform. Ethics panels were established, new partnerships formed, and productivity soared under Ethan's guidance. Yet through all the success, he remained unchanged. He still rode the bus instead of hiring a driver. He still coded late into the night. And every Friday, he still delivered food to shelters around the city, wearing the same uniform he'd worn the day he walked into Quantum with a tray of coffee. "It reminds me where I started," he told Michael once, "and that no system stays stable forever. You have to keep maintaining it." Dalton, meanwhile, faced the consequences of his downfall. The court sentenced him to federal prison, his fortune dismantled by lawsuits and penalties. Occasionally, reporters tried to draw parallels between the two men, the fallen CEO and the boy who replaced him, but Ethan refused to comment. "He's irrelevant," he said once. "The system corrected itself. That's all that matters." In time, quantum dynamics became more than just a company. It became a symbol of what could happen when intelligence met integrity. Universities invited Ethan to speak, though he rarely accepted. When he did, his talks were simple, direct, and strangely moving. "Genius," he would say, "isn't about knowing everything. It's about noticing what others overlook. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything." Months turned into a year. The scandal faded into history, replaced by stories of innovation and growth. The world moved on, but for Ethan, the lessons remained. Power, he realized, wasn't measured in control, but in clarity. Leadership wasn't about commanding others. It was about maintaining balance. And in that balance, he finally found peace. The morning sun filtered softly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of quantum dynamics, throwing warm light across the open atrium where the company's employees were beginning to gather for the first staff meeting of the new era. It had been 6 months since Dalton's arrest, and the company that once seemed poised for collapse was slowly coming back to life. The panic and shame that had filled those halls had faded, replaced by a sense of fragile optimism. The marble floor gleamed, the glass walls were spotless, and the low hum of conversation carried a tone of curiosity instead of fear. Ethan stood at the balcony overlooking the crowd, his reflection mirrored in the polished glass behind him. He still found it strange to be there every day, no longer as a visitor or a delivery boy, but as the quiet figure who now shaped the company's future. He had resisted the idea of taking the role at first. Leadership still felt alien to him. Too much attention, too many voices, too much unpredictability. But the board had insisted, and in the end, Ethan had accepted, not because of ambition, but because of necessity. The company needed stability, and stability was something he understood. What had surprised everyone was how naturally his calm logic translated into management. Where Dalton had ruled through intimidation, Ethan governed through structure. Meetings began and ended on time. Data replaced ego in decision-making. Every department had measurable goals, transparent budgets, and direct lines of accountability. The employees had begun calling the new culture precision with purpose. He preferred not to call it anything at all. For him, it was simply how systems should work. Linda now worked on the 15th floor, no longer as a cleaner, but as the coordinator of the new employee welfare program. She'd fought the idea of a promotion at first, embarrassed by the attention, but Ethan had insisted. "You know this building better than anyone. he'd said. "You've seen how people treat each other when they think no one's watching. That makes you perfect for this job." She had smiled, reluctantly agreeing, and the first initiative she proposed was to provide full health care coverage and paid leave for all maintenance and custodial staff. Within months, it became company policy. The morning meeting began with a quiet sense of ceremony. Ethan descended the staircase slowly, his usual unhurried gait making the room settle into silence. Cameras from business media networks had been invited, but only as observers, not participants. The employees had grown used to his manner soft-spoken, concise, deliberate. He never raised his voice, yet somehow everyone heard him. 6 months ago, he began, this company was broken, not because of its technology, but because of its people. We confused intelligence with importance and speed with progress. We measured success by how much we could extract, not by how much we could sustain. That changed because all of you decided to build something better. The room was still, but the energy was different from the forced applause that had filled Dalton's old assemblies. The faces looking up at Ethan were not afraid. They were listening. He continued, speaking not from a script but from thought. The systems we build reflect the systems within us. When code breaks, it doesn't mean the machine failed. It means we failed to predict what it needed. The same is true here. From now on, we design not just for profit, but for people. The applause that followed was genuine, rising gradually like a wave that filled the atrium. Ethan didn't linger to absorb it. He nodded once, gave a brief, almost awkward smile, and stepped down from the stage. After the meeting, Michael found him in his office, leaning over a digital schematic displayed across the wall screen. "Still allergic to compliments, I see," the journalist said, setting a cup of coffee on the desk. Ethan glanced up with a faint smirk. "They're inefficient. They interrupt thought." Michael laughed. "You've changed, but not that much." Their friendship had deepened since the scandal ended. Michael had written his exposé, yes, but he'd also chosen to stay on as an ethics consultant for Quantum's new programs. "I came to tell you," he said, "the foundation paperwork is ready. You just need to sign." Ethan blinked, taking the tablet. On the screen in clean text was the name, the Cole Initiative for Neurodiverse Talent Development. He hesitated before signing. The idea had begun months ago, a seed planted after the media storm finally quieted. Ethan had seen firsthand how easily brilliance could be overlooked, how society mistook difference for deficiency. He wanted to change that. The foundation would fund scholarships, mentorship programs, and internships for young people on the autism spectrum and others who struggled to fit into conventional work structures. "You really think it'll work?" he asked quietly. Michael nodded. "If anyone can prove that neurodiversity is a strength, it's you." Ethan signed without further comment. He never liked ceremony. The work itself was what mattered. As weeks passed, the initiative gained momentum. Universities reached out, tech firms offered partnerships, and applications began pouring in from students who saw in Ethan a mirror of their own potential. He personally reviewed each candidate, often late at night in the quiet of his office. What fascinated him most weren't grades or awards, but the small notes and personal statements, the ways these young minds described their relationship with patterns, logic, and silence. He recognized in them the same instinct he'd carried all his life, the compulsion to make sense of the world's chaos. Linda visited him one evening after most of the staff had left. She carried a folder filled with letters, thank yous from employees whose families had benefited from the new welfare programs. "They're calling you the quiet miracle," she said, half teasing, half proud. Ethan smiled faintly. "That sounds inefficient too." She laughed softly. "You may never get used to praise, but I hope you understand what you've done here. You didn't just fix a company, Ethan. You gave people a way to believe again." He looked at her and, for a rare moment, allowed himself to feel it, the quiet satisfaction of restoration. Outside quantum dynamics, the world had moved on. The media eventually found new stories, new scandals. Dalton's name surfaced once more, months later during his sentencing. The courtroom coverage lasted a day. He was given 12 years in federal prison, with no possibility of early release. When Michael told Ethan, he merely nodded. "He'll have time to think," he said. "Maybe that's the real punishment. Do you forgive him?" Michael asked. Ethan considered it. Forgiveness isn't the right term, he said finally. Understanding is. People act according to their design. His design failed. Michael said nothing more. Some statements needed no interpretation. As the foundation grew, Ethan's public profile did too, though he never sought it. Invitations to speak at universities arrived weekly. He declined most, but once, at Linda's gentle insistence, he agreed to address a conference on neurodiversity and innovation. The auditorium was packed. Cameras lined the aisles, flashes briefly cutting across his vision. He stood at the podium, blinking at the brightness, steadying his breath. Public speaking had always been a challenge. Too many eyes, too many stimuli, but he focused on the rhythm of his own heartbeat until the noise softened. People often ask, he began, what it means to think differently. They treat it like a disadvantage that can be overcome. But difference is not a defect, it's a direction. The world doesn't progress because everyone agrees. It progresses because someone sees a pattern the rest missed. That's how I see things. That's how most of us see things. When he finished, the applause lasted longer than he could stand. He bowed slightly and left the stage before the lights overwhelmed him. Later that night, he returned to the company's innovation lab, a vast open space filled with screens, prototypes, and scattered notes. On one wall hung the motto he had chosen for the new division: "The quietest mind can make the loudest impact." The phrase had started as something he'd once told a nervous intern who doubted his own worth. It had since become the heart of Quantum's new philosophy. Ethan stood there for a long time, watching the reflection of those words in the glass. He thought about everything that had led him here: the humiliation, the struggle, the small moments of clarity that had rebuilt an empire not through power, but through reason. As months passed, the company expanded beyond expectations. Their new algorithms for sustainable data systems attracted global attention, and their open-source collaboration model inspired copycats across the tech world. Yet Ethan kept his routine simple. He still lived in the same modest apartment with Linda and Noah. He still rode the bus to work, carrying a backpack that looked too worn for someone of his position. His co-workers learned to respect that eccentricity, understanding that simplicity wasn't a quirk, it was a choice. He found peace in constancy, in the familiarity of patterns that no longer trapped him, but guided him. One evening, near the anniversary of Dalton's downfall, Quantum hosted a ceremony to unveil the new research center dedicated to ethical AI and accessibility. It was to bear Ethan's name, a decision he'd resisted until the board overruled him. The lobby was filled with guests, journalists, and even government representatives. Linda stood at the front, radiant in a simple navy dress, pride glowing in her eyes. When the curtain dropped to reveal the plaque, the Ethan Cole Innovation Center, the crowd applauded. Ethan stood beside her, hands clasped loosely, his expression calm but contemplative. When it was his turn to speak, he kept it brief. Technology doesn't change the world, he said. People do, but only when they remember that progress without empathy is just another form of failure. Let's keep building something that listens. The applause was thunderous, but he only bowed his head slightly and stepped back, content to let the noise belong to others. After the event, when the crowd had dispersed and the lights dimmed, Ethan wandered through the empty halls of the new center. The polished floors reflected faint images of the future he'd helped design, rooms filled with potential, waiting for new minds to shape them. He paused before a large window overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered, alive and endless. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what had changed. The boy who once delivered coffee to this building had rewritten its code, its purpose, its conscience. And yet, standing there, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt balanced. The system was stable again. He returned home late, the streets quiet beneath the glow of streetlights. Linda was asleep on the couch, a book open on her chest. Noah's faint breathing came from the next room. Ethan moved softly, covering his mother with a blanket, then sat by the window. Outside, a delivery scooter passed, its headlights cutting through the mist. For a moment, he smiled. He remembered the weight of those coffee trays, the silence of the elevator rides, the way people had looked past him as if he were invisible. Now people listened, not because he was loud, but because he had learned how to speak in the one language everyone understood the truth. He opened his laptop not to work, but to write something for himself. A note, maybe, or a line of code. The screen glowed softly in the dark. He typed slowly, deliberately, the words forming like logic in his mind. No system stays perfect. But as long as someone cares enough to fix it, it never truly breaks. He saved the file, closed the lid, and leaned back in his chair. Outside, the first light of dawn was beginning to rise, painting the sky in quiet shades of silver. Ethan watched it until the city stirred awake again, and for once he allowed himself to rest. Not because the work was done, but because the world, at least for now, was running right. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales of resilience and innovation. Hit the bell so you never miss the next chapter, and check out our other videos for more incredible journeys. Share this video with your friends and help spread the message. Every story of courage deserves to be heard,